The first returning writer for Doctor Who, Terry Nation was popular amongst the production team because of just how fast he worked. He could pump out entire scripts in just a few weeks, which was handy against the time crunch that Doctor Who's production was becoming. He'd just written The Daleks, a story which launched perhaps the most iconic part of the whole show besides the TARDIS. So, of course, to keep the interest going, he was tasked with creating another alien race to compete with the Daleks in popularity. Did he succeed? No. In fact, none of the attempts at creating the next Daleks worked at all. Case in point, we have the keys of Marinus. The TARDIS lands on a strange island with an acid sea surrounding it. There's also some glass submarines docked nearby, which somehow they don't see despite being right in front of them.
Good gracious!
There is a rubber suit inside, and the crew spot a massive building in the distance. Susan gets distracted by some footprints and wanders off, which leads the crew to investigate the building as somewhere she might have gone. Susan is there, and narrowly escapes being captured by a rotating wall, sending the mysterious rubber creature into the walls of the building. She later... Oh, come on, how can she not see him? Suspensive reality is always needed when watching old shows, but even so, characters' eye lines are always shrugged off as if they're half blind. Susan is saved by a mysterious figure and is soon found by the Doctor and Barbara. Meanwhile, Ian saves the mysterious figure from another rubber demon. And the man reveals himself to be named Arbitan. He explains to the crew that he is the last remaining of the Guardians of the Conscience of Marinus. Basically, Marinus lived in peace for hundreds of years until a group named the Voords, led by some guy named Yartek, decided they didn't want to live in peace anymore and are planning to overthrow the conscience of Marinus, which is what keeps the peace, in order to make Marinus a criminal's paradise, effectively. In order to stop them, the crew must collect 5 keys that control the conscience, which, once all are inserted, can regulate the peace control, so to speak, in order to stop the Voords. He doesn't really give them much of a choice either, putting an invisible force field around the TARDIS, so they accept and are given travel dials that will teleport them to the location of the next key. This is Scooby-Doo in the cyber chase, basically. Arbitan already has the first key in his possession, so it's just 4 keys they have to find. They set off for the first key as Arbitan is suddenly killed by a Voord, unbeknownst to the crew. In the first location, the crew find themselves treated like royalty. Their every will is done by several servants, seemingly coordinated by a man named Altos. Their society gives people whatever they want, whenever they want it, to avoid temptation. Ian is very hesitant about all of this, considering that Altos claims there is no catch. During the night, the crew all have discs placed on their head, however, Barbara turns and her disc falls off. The next morning, she claims that everything is rotted and not what the servants claim they are. And they use this first-person shot, which I usually find quite tacky in modern media, but there's something so unsettling about it. Like they are placing you in the position of being the outcast, now that everyone else is under the mind control of the mystical discs. And it tracks for the remainder of the episode too. The viewer sees everything as it actually is now, even when Barbara isn't around. There's a great scene here where the Doctor asks for a massive laboratory, and what he actually gets is an empty room, but yet the Doctor and Ian marvel at it.
Doctor, isn't that a cyclotron? Huh? Oh, yes. It's a simple toy. I'm sure that will amuse you.
Barbara is escorted away, but later escapes and hides. I mean, come on. They didn't do this tunnel vision thing that often in the previous stories, I swear. Anyway, Barbara meets one of the servant girls who turns out to be Arbitan's daughter, named Sabitha, also under the same mind control. Turns out, she has the key around her neck. Now all Barbara has to do is destroy the mind control and they can escape. Altos finds him first though and Barbara flees, finding Ian. He's evil at the moment though and takes Barbara to the masterminds behind the whole scheme. You've got to be kidding me. Yep, so it's snail brains. What, is that funny to you or something? Ian tries to kill Barbara, but Barbara escapes and beats the shit out of the brains until they die and everyone is set free. Altos remembers he was also sent by Arbitan a long time ago to recover the keys, but made it only as far as the first one. Good job, buddy. Altos and Sabitha decide to join the crew on their quest. It's here where the group all decide to split up and cover more ground quicker. The Doctor takes another one of Altos's group, a man named Eprin, to the 4th and final key. An almost nameless character introduced out of nowhere. Mark my words, he'll die shortly. The others continue on to key number 2, with Susan finding herself in some sort of screaming jungle? Ah, good guess. The jungle stops screaming after everyone else arrives, making Susan look like a schizo. Nevertheless, they proceed to split up again, with Ian, Altos and Sabitha trying to find an entrance into the jungle's tomb. Susan is attacked by the jungle, which is not only screaming but seemingly alive. Barbara actually spots the key just sitting there suspiciously, and after grabbing it, she falls victim to the rotating wall again. When the others find out, they decide that if Barbara were in real danger, she would have used the dial to teleport to the next location, but Ian isn't convinced, so while the others continue on, Ian goes to find Barbara. He does so, almost getting chopped in half if not for Barbara's warning. The two of them both get trapped, with Barbara about to get squished by a dagger roof and Ian racing to break open a cage to save her. However, Barbara is saved by an old man, whose name, I discovered in the credits because he's never actually named in the show, is Darius. He's a dying old friend of Arbitan's, presumably a former guardian. He doesn't last very long though after being attacked by the jungle, and manages to whisper out a clue for Ian and Barbara before he dies.
D, E, 3, O, 2.
What do you mean? I don't understand.
They enter the next room to find a safe, believing it to be the combination, but it's not. They look around for something else that he could have meant, finding Darius' books about the jungle, finding out that the jungle has fallen victim to a growth accelerator, which instead of helping the plants grow, has made them jump several millennia in evolution, which is why they can now scream and move freely. During the night, they're both attacked by the jungle, with one of the many glass jars in the room smashing, revealing a chemical formula. Ian figures out that the combination is actually a formula, and the jar with the formula in question contains the key. They narrowly escape the jungle, heading straight into the Snows of Terror. They're rescued by Vassor, an intimidating yet knowledgeable occupant of the Snowy Mountains. He tells them that he's met Altos and the girls, who forced him to help them search for the key in a nearby cave. He gave them supplies but refused to go any further. Ian heads after them with some of Vassor's supplies, trading his dial. For some reason, Barbara stays with Vassor and discovers fairly quickly that he also has the other dials. Barbara is attacked while Ian finds Altos tied up and left for dead by none other than Vassor. Ian also discovers that Vassor has put raw meat in the bag of supplies he gave him as a ploy to lure the wolves to Ian, ensuring he would never return. They go back to Vassor's hut, stopping his attack on Barbara, and they force him to take them to the cave where Susan and Sabitha are. The girls meanwhile have discovered where the key is, surrounded by seemingly frozen soldiers. They meet up with the others as Vassor traps them in the cave, untying a rope bridge across a chasm. While Ian and Altos figure out another way across the chasm, Barbara manages to melt the ice encasing the third key. This also frees the soldiers though, and they make chase. Susan manages to make it over the makeshift ice bridge and restore the rope bridge as the crew escape back to Vassor's hut to take back their dials. Vassor is astounded that they all made it back alive and attacks Susan. However, he's killed by a sword through the door by one of the ice soldiers. They all use their dials one last time to meet with the doctor. Ian discovers an open door leading to the last key with a dead body inside the room. Ian is then knocked out by an off-screen foe who frames Ian for the murder of the man in the room. This turns out to be Ypres, I fucking told you. Ian is charged with the murder and prepares for his trial. The punishment? Execution. However, they're in the city of Millennius, where instead of innocent until proven guilty, the justice system works guilty until proven innocent. So he needs a good defence lawyer basically, and since Johnny Cochran isn't around...
I quite agree with you, my boy.
Doctor! Grandfather!
Yep, the Doctor returns after William Hartnell's 2-week holiday. No, I'm not kidding, that's really where he was the last 2 episodes. The Doctor manages to postpone the trial for 2 days while he looks over the prosecution's case and creates his own. They go back to the crime scene and the Doctor bases his case on the relief guard Aidan being the one who killed Ypres. Hartnell actually flubs a line here and says the wrong word.
I can't improve at this very moment. I can't prove at this very moment.
I feel bad that I keep pointing those out, but it fascinates me about the carefree production that the show was forced to adopt early on because of the production crunch. Barbara and Susan go to Aidan's home to speak with Calla, his wife. Aidan actually returns home during this and almost slips up that he did steal the key, but escorts Barbara and Susan out before he can say anything more.
That was very foolish of you.
Don't you talk to me like that!
That's incredibly dark. The trial resumes and the Doctor tricks Aidan into confessing in front of the judges. However, he's quickly assassinated Oswald style to shut him up. Barbara gets a phone call while the trial enters a recess to find that it's Susan who has been captured by the real murderers, one of which is threatening to kill Susan unless the crew stops snooping around. Well, because they know that Aidan was involved somewhat now, although not the true culprit, Barbara, Altos and Sabitha go back to speak with Calla without informing the Doctor, and despite claiming not to know anything, Calla slips up and mentions the phone call that Barbara had, which gives her up, and they rescue Susan. Calla admits to her wrongdoings but claims Ian was complicit in the whole ordeal in order to still ensure his execution. The Doctor deduces that the stolen key is being kept inside the murder weapon, the mace. However, the prosecutor tries to sneak away with it before they can find the key, which doesn't work, and he's exposed as the true murderer of Ypres. With all 4 keys, the crew return to Arbitan using their dials. Altos and Sabitha go ahead, immediately being captured by Yartek and the Voords, who take the 3 keys that they have in their possession, placing them in the machine. No, that's not a blooper, that's in the episode. You know, like the stormtrooper from Star Wars, except it's almost unmissable. All the Verds need is the last key to overthrow the conscience. The crew, who have the last key, also return and split up to find Altos, Sabitha and Arbitan. Ian and Susan find Yartek, who pretends to be Arbitan, claiming to be suffering from some disease that will shortly kill him. Ian gives him the last key, and they head back to meet up with Barbara and the Doctor. Altos tells him that Arbitan is dead and Yartek is now in control, which is who they gave the key to. That is, until Ian reveals that he felt something was off and actually gave Yartek the fake key that Barbara got from the tomb in the jungle. Altos tells him that this will cause the conscience to blow up, so the crew head to find Yartek, with William Hartnell skipping a few lines in the script in order to do so.
You mean the machine will blow up?
Yes,
and
everything in this building with it.
Through the bogey wall.
The Verds have already inserted the key into the machine, however, and are all killed by the explosion as the crew flee. Now Marinus must learn to exist without the conscience's hold on them, free to do whatever they wish. The crew all say their goodbyes and head off as Altos and Sabitha walk off to begin their new life. It's a bit of a messy story, I'm not gonna lie. I enjoyed this one while I was watching it, but it is very clear that the introductory part of the show is now over, and they're working on making it last. With over 40 episodes to produce on a weekly basis, a lot of mistakes just have to be included in the episode, as there was no time to do another take or edit it out. William Hartnell especially found this schedule difficult. Alongside his brain condition, which made remembering lines hard, he had to do so at exhausting lengths. Thankfully, he got a 2-week holiday during the serial, as previously mentioned, so episodes 3 and 4 are doctorless. The whole structure of this story is rather unusual. Unlike Terry Nation's previous story and the other previous serials, this story really takes advantage of the episodic format. Each episode has the crew finding a different key in a completely different setting until it all culminates in returning to where it all started to finish it off. They would later attempt this on a bigger scale during Tom Baker's tenure as the Doctor, with the key to time taking place over the course of the entire 16th season. The Verds are the attempt at another Daleks, and unfortunately they didn't have the same staying power, considering they almost never speak apart from Yartek, who comes across as the biggest afterthought of the story, only being introduced as the main villain in the final episode of the serial. It's not hard to see why they didn't really take off. What child was going to ask for a Verd toy for Christmas? I mean, this is actually Terry Nation's only non-Dalek story, until season 13's The Android Invasion. It seems like they didn't trust him after this one didn't exceed the expectations of following perhaps the most iconic television moment of the 60s. Well, besides the moon landing. Or JFK's assassination. Or the Beatles and Ed Sullivan. Okay, never mind, but you get what I'm trying to say. Did they really think the Verds were going to be the next big thing? When you literally have one of them almost fall on their face during the climactic episode. They seem lame as hell. They can't even stand up, and they're only in the first and last episodes. That means a 5-week gap between appearances. The Daleks had 6 back-to-back weeks to make an impression on audiences. And while there is some really interesting stuff here, like episode 2's mind control plot, or episode 3's living jungle, which the BBC were actually sued over because of its similarities to the novel The Day of the Triffids, but nothing came of it. It seems like this serial is full of little ideas that Nation couldn't develop into full stories, so he created the Keys of Marinus in order for the crew to explore these ideas in 1-episode stints, which I guess might explain why he never wrote another non-Dalek story after this for 13 years. He wasted all his good ideas on this one story. It does keep things refreshing though, unlike a future story on this season, which we'll get to later on. It feels like a big adventure, which is what they were going for, so they did succeed in some way. It's just a shame that the actual story itself is paced horrendously, and the main villain is just laughable in terms of both the fear factor and actually doing evil things on screen, you know, which is what the viewer tends to only see. They don't do anything. In terms of the crew, it looks like Ian and Barbara have finally accepted that they won't be going home anytime soon, with Ian even making a joke about it during the first episode.
Grandfather, I wonder where we are.
Well, one thing's sure, we're not at Southend.
The Doctor begins to refer to Ian as my dear boy and my dear Chesterton, showing his admiration for his quick-thinking abilities and his bravery in heading into dangerous situations, ready to fight. And while it's not my personal favourite of the dynamic that the First Doctor has with his companions, that character will come into it next season. It's one that really lightens up the whole show. Think back to the first story, where the Doctor is almost like the villain, kidnapping Ian and Barbara. Now they're best buddies, and the Doctor is incredibly likeable. They have done so much, and I think the serialised format does help things. Despite the fact that they are 42 episode long seasons, it doesn't really feel like it when you split them up into individual stories like this. Look, I've seen the show do better already. Even Marco Polo was a better story, and I can't even see that one, but they tried something new. Trying to replace the Daleks didn't work. work, but it won't stop them trying for the next, oh God knows how long. At least we can rest easy with another historic story up next.